had a really interesting discussion yesterday with former Energy Minister Max Bradford, who opened my eyes and helped kick along a discussion which has for a long time been almost heretical in New Zealand. The idea that nuclear power might be a solution to some of the challenges we are facing around energy. And it would be fair to say we have far more challenges around our energy supply than we used to, largely because of the global fear over so-called climate change and decarbonising energy production. We find ourselves now with businesses closing as wholesale electricity prices go through the roof due to a lack of supply, caused largely by our efforts to meet our obligations under various greenhouse and climate accords. Max Bradford told us yesterday that he believed technology in regards to nuclear energy had advanced to a point where it was now a viable, indeed preferable option for New Zealand. And perhaps we postulated the national temperature on such a debate has changed somewhat in the last 30 years. Well, I asked Ben about this. We thought we'd find someone, see what else is happening elsewhere in the world. And we find in Australia a young man called Will Shackel, who has become a lobbyist advocate for nuclear power for Australia. Nuclear for Australia, I think, is the lobby group he's involved in. And I thought, let's have a talk with someone across the ditch about what's happening there. And Will Shackel joins us by phone now. Will, welcome to the platform. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Sean. Thanks for having me.
All right. I imagine the circumstances in Australia are a little different, but where are you at in terms of the possibility of nuclear power supplementing or being introduced to your national electricity grid?
So look, unlike New Zealand, nuclear is actually banned in Australia, and it's banned at multiple levels. So we've got state and territory bans, but in addition, we've got federal bans. And I guess what I'm currently doing is working to lift those bans because Australia is experiencing an energy crisis. Obviously, it's probably a very similar situation to New Zealand. But in addition, there are also that, objective to reach our climate goals in Australia. And compared to New Zealand, we've got much higher emissions than you do in New Zealand. So that's also an objective of our politicians to lower our emissions. So when we look to a solution like nuclear, which is the most reliable and least emissions energy source of any option available to us, it just simply doesn't make sense why we'd slap a ban on it.
Yeah, well, I talked yesterday with this former energy minister. I'm 60, so my cultural background is I think of 3 Mile Island, I think of Chernobyl, I think of New Zealand sort of ban the bomb movement. Therefore, I'm culturally disinclined to embrace nuclear energy, and it has been for a long time, for a generation in New Zealand, a taboo subject. And I imagine huge cooling rods and massive nuclear power plants with sickles and hammers on the front of them, Is that the reality of nuclear power today?
No. So the reality, first of all, including those events, nuclear energy is the second safest form of energy statistically. It's safer than wind power. And you only have to look at some of those specific events in the actual circumstances there, say, for instance, 3 Mile Island. Most people probably wouldn't realise that the residents around 3 Mile Island were exposed to a similar amount of radiation or even less than an X-ray. And it's for that reason that no one was actually harmed by the radiation from 3 Mile Island. Now, most people probably thought that thousands of people died in that accident, when in reality they didn't. And it's a similar case where, the events at Fukushima and Chernobyl have been blown way out of proportion, and it's around that fear of, radiation. Now, first of all, all of those accidents have occurred with reactors which have been built more than 40 years ago. The modern nuclear reactors, we're talking about in Australia and you'd be talking about in New Zealand are built safe to withstand these disasters and to ensure that these disasters are impossible. So, a Chernobyl couldn't occur with these modern kind of reactors. And when we think of these modern kind of reactors, these are being produced by some of the most trusted companies in the world, whether it's Westinghouse, whether it's GE Hitachi, whether it's the Koreans who've recently opened up a large nuclear plant in the UAE, which is providing a quarter of their power as of a few days ago.
Wow.
So these are huge installations. There was a huge movement recently with nuclear power, and I think what many people are currently saying is there's a nuclear renaissance occurring. We've got 50 countries for the first time considering adding nuclear energy to their mix. In addition to the 32 countries which currently use it, nuclear currently provides around 10% of global power. It provides more clean energy in the grid than either solar or wind. So if we're talking about solutions contributing to climate action around the world, it's not solar panels and wind turbines, it's nuclear reactors, which I think would shock many, many people. So this is a very modern solution. There's so much development occurring right now, and I think for that reason, it's very different from the what we're talking about decades ago.
And as I say,
nuclear.
in my mind, I know I have got to get with the program and realise the world's not where it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's changed, and the technology's changed. Well, can I ask you, and I do this to everyone I interview, because I want to know conflicts of interest and motivations. Are you paid or in the pay of companies that advocate nuclear energy?
No. And
Okay.
I think that I'm not. And I think this is the thing that, as many people would know, nuclear has a very bad communications problem. So they're not really they haven't really thought about paying anyone to lobby for them in a major way, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how much reaction we had to that interview yesterday. The point was also made about a country like New Zealand, and I'd make the comparison with Japan, which against all the odds, when you think about its national history, has embraced nuclear power. New Zealand cannot plug in or buy energy from another country. Because of our isolation, we have to be absolutely self-sufficient in the production of and storage of electricity. Is Australia in the same position or not?
We are. And I think that's the thing for Australia is that, we can't import any electricity in that way. So say in Europe, they're able to export energy. And a good example of that is actually with France and Germany. So France has 65% nuclear, and they actually export a lot of that nuclear capacity to Germany, which has recently shut down its nuclear plants, which has led to it having, higher power bills than France. All of these different things which people point to with that comparison. So Australia doesn't have that luxury.
The other thing you might have, though I'm not sure of the technology, you have uranium. You have the raw material.
Yeah, so Australia has the most uranium in the world, around a third of the world's uranium. Now, unfortunately, we're not the world's largest exporter at the moment because there are some states and territories where, again, that is banned, which just simply does not make any sense to me. But Australia, compared to New Zealand, which I would imagine doesn't have any uranium reserves,
Nope.
has that incredible advantage, which I think it's a real shame we're not taking advantage of it. But I'm sure our leaders would be willing to export it to New Zealand, or at least the enriched uranium or fuel if New Zealand decided to go down the path of nuclear. That's something that we do for other nations. I think it's quite ironic that our uranium is ending up in nuclear power plants around the world, providing clean, reliable, cheap electricity, but we're not able to use it here. It's simply shocking.